In America today, people are actually more afraid of saying the wrong word than committing the wrong act, believe it or not. Polls show nearly 9 out of 10 Americans admit they self censor, biting their tongue at work, with friends, even with family. And cancel culture isn't just coming from the left anymore, it's also on the right, from college campuses to corporate boardrooms to conservative churches. Americans everywhere are biting their tongues. We call ourselves a free country, but are we really free if speaking your mind can cost you your job, your reputation, or even your relationships? Or, you know what? Maybe that's just accountability. My guest today is Dr. Chloe Carmichael. She's a clinical psychologist, a best selling author, and speaker. Her latest book is about the crisis of cancel culture, self censorship, and how it's poisoning our mental health and even our democracy. It's called Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. Dr. Chloe Carmichael, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kim. It's great to be with you. I was saying before, I've been following you for a long time, so it's great to meet you.
Oh, thank you. I try to be a free speech warrior myself, like you. And it is tough. It's tough. I think one good question, and I just kind of want to start here, and then I want to get into the mental health aspect because I do think that this is ruining our relationships, our society. I mean, and we've got Thanksgiving, we've got the holidays coming up, right? And that's always like really stressful for people when it comes to speech. But I want to start off with because a lot of people right away, their knee jerk reaction is it's not an issue. Free speech, the cancel culture issue is just accountability. That's what it is. So it is what you live in society, and society gives you accountability, and that's that. I mean, what do you make of that argument that I see this all the time? From the left, they said it all the time when they were canceling people on the right, going after people, trying to film them, and then just say, well, that's just accountability. And now I'm actually seeing that on the right, doing it to the left. There's a lot of filming of the left and being like, well, this is just accountability. That's what this is. It's not a free speech issue. What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, I think all of that is fair. And, one of the things that I talk about in the book is that uncertainty always increases anxiety. So I think it's important to really define our terms and have certainty and clarity about what exactly we mean, by free speech and, the First Amendment. And so there is a legal definition of what free speech means. And so, if you want to cancel somebody or somebody wants to quote cancel you because of something you said, that's actually not really a legal free speech violation. Nobody's
Right.
throwing anybody in jail for that. However, there was, I think, some really twisted stuff that went on with the government when YouTube, Meta, and then Twitter were getting secretly pressured and told to dethrottle and censor and not allow the public to speak on Section 230 platforms. And what happened is we got what's called a false sense of social consensus. So if it's, say, 2021 and you go on Twitter and you want to say a man cannot become a woman, you would think that you're the only person who would say that or whatever, because they just were deplatforming, sometimes even secretly, people that were saying things about COVID or whatever. I know you know very well about the whole Fauci drama. So I think it is important to understand that, yeah, we can quote cancel each other. We can choose not to talk to each other because we don't like what people say. I don't think it's particularly good for mental health, especially when it's like, because you're calling somebody a fascist or you're calling them Hitler when that's, objectively not true. I do think we get into some mental health problems then, but sorry, I'm babbling because I have so much to say about this. So I'll stop and take a breath.
Well, it's just, I think you're absolutely right. There's obviously the legal definition of free speech, and people that engage in cancel culture will bring that up and say, well, this isn't the government coming after you, it's
Yeah.
us. This is just accountability. And I guess there's maybe a level of that. I mean, we want society to sort of regulate each other, right? That there's aspects of society that, I mean, there's aspects of society I wish we would really, really start regulating as a society, and kind of like OnlyFans, for example, and porn culture. I just think it's so destructive for the family. It's so destructive for relationships. It's been destructive for young girls' mental health. Like there's a lot of that that it's And this is where things get tricky, right? Where it's like you want society to have a pressure to kind of say that that behavior is not good, right? You don't want the government doing that to you, but it's good if society says these are the things we want to promote as a society that we think are healthy for society versus what we think is not healthy for society. So this is where I get into the little like I guess the logical barrier or the logical conundrum I would say is a lot of me says free speech should be a cultural that should be ingrained in our culture. We should as Americans, it doesn't matter what the if the government's coming after you or not and the legal definition of free speech, we as a culture should embrace free speech because that's what a free people do. But at the same time, I then think about, well, but then there's these like porn is considered free speech. And I mean that's why it's allowed is because of that. And so do I that's when then I get into the mental conundrum of, but I want society to actually kind of regulate that and put pressure on that to get people to stop ruining their lives, especially young women. But right, so that's what. So do you
Yeah.
see the dilemma
So,
there?
no, that's absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's actually something I talk about a little bit in the book as well. Um, so, and I don't know how you feel about this. I would be super curious to know. But did you know, for example, that pornography was not always considered speech, right? So there's a big difference between freedom of expression and freedom of speech. The Constitution guarantees freedom of speech. And then I think it was somewhere in like the 1970s or whatever that porn got rolled into that under freedom of expression, even though it actually is not really about speech. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never understood that. I've never understood why it was placed under free speech or free expression. Um, I still I still haven't been able to wrap my mind around why. And what I try to do, I take my personal emotion out of it
Mhm.
always, and I try to think about, okay, what other circumstance would it be, if a person is doing an act on camera, like, and not that, but, I'm just anything else, and that would we consider that free expression? It's I haven't been able to like wrap my mind around why exactly that's considered free speech or free expression.
Yeah, no, and that's very fair, and I just want you I to as, like, I'm validating you as a
Yeah.
psychologist, but yeah, it's you're not al at all alone in that, and it's been longer in our country's history that porn was not considered part of free speech
Well, let
than
me
that
just
it
say,
has been.
sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
you're not allowed to have sex in public, like in a public park. So why, right? So then how is it free speech? Like that, I guess that's where it gets okay, if it's really truly free speech or free expression, shouldn't you be able to do that in public?
Well, so not necessarily as well either. That's an interesting litmus test, to try to apply. But so, for example, as well, though, you could say women are stupid, right? Like that's something you can legally say, but you could not say get a megaphone and repeat it over and over outside of a Girl Scouts meeting because that would be considered harassment, right? If you're
Okay.
in a public place, there's rules and regulations even still about harassment. So just the simple fact that you cannot have sex in public wouldn't be like a rationale for regulating whether or not porn is legal. So I don't have all the answers, but I just wanted to mark that you're zeroing in on something important right away there about porn, and it is actually not really kind of a settled belief that porn is necessarily speech because it up until like the 1970s it was not considered
Mhm.
speech, and so allowing it to be considered as speech, as you're noticing, has had some societal implications that I think some people are reconsidering.
Yeah. Okay, so the megaphone in the park example. This then what then social media, I would think is kind of like having a megaphone in a park.
Well, okay, so but that's an interesting one too, because of Section 230, right? So when you have a social media, then we're supposed to be allowed to just say whatever we want there. And the government, or I'm sorry, the platform itself is not supposed to regulate it. Like I can't choose to post in the New York Times whatever I want because they're not, they're a private publisher. Social media is not supposed to be considered a private publisher. And so whatever you could say legally, in the public square, so to speak, you're supposed to be able to say legally on social media. They're
Right.
not really supposed to regulate beyond that. And that includes, quote, misinformation. If I want to stand on a street corner and say, blueberries will make your hair grow, I can say that. And I could say it on social media too, even if it's, quote, misinformation.
It just gets so tricky, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
this aspect of it gets really, really tricky, and this is what's weaponized. I mean, these are the arguments that are weaponized because they'll say, "Well, this isn't a free speech issue. The government's not coming after you. I'm censoring you. I'm making you lose your job. Your employer's private. Your employer has the right to fire you because of the things that you said on social media, even though the
Which
cancel
is
culture
true.
mob." Right, yeah, it's
Mhm.
true, right, but the cancel culture mob, I mean, one thing that I saw was, on the it was really disappointing to me to see because, you know, since the Biden administration really clamped down and was really targeting people since COVID, really, we saw a lot of well, we saw it actually before COVID. There was weren't allowed to talk about potential election interference in 2020. We're
Good
not
point.
allowed to talk about, um
Trans.
yeah, I mean, there's just been a lot of and especially aimed at the right, coming from the left for a long time, the cancel culture aspect of we're trying to film you and then paint you as a racist, right? That was
Mhm.
going on for a long time. And the Me Too movement was even sort of I think some people were obviously very fairly attacked, and then there were some that were absolutely not fairly attacked. But it was still put out there, and it was this we're trying to catch you, this gotcha sort of secret
Mhm.
cam type thing. And now on the right, I'm unfortunately seeing the same sort of stuff happening. I've seen a lot of really prominent figures on the right doing like Scott Presler doing like a complete cancel culture campaign. Like he's out there literally hunting people down and telling people, "Send us your videos, send us your information. Like let's hunt them down and expose them for the things that they've said about Charlie Kirk's assassination or whatever it might be." It started off with that, and this is how it always starts. It starts off with something that many people in society would agree is abhorrent speech. Not wrong. You're still allowed to say it, but we would agree culturally, we don't really like you celebrating some young man getting killed. But then it kind of evolved into, Look, they just hate Republicans." And it was like, okay, they're allowed to hate Republicans all they want. Like, you hate them. I mean, that's what you're doing. So but it's really disheartening to see this. But how do we, and so that people will weaponize that and say, it's not the government coming after you, it's me, the private people, it's the
Mhm.
social media lynch mob, and you just get this accountability. I mean, what do you, is it accountability, do you think, or is this ruining I feel like this is ruining our society, but I don't know, or
Mhm.
maybe is it helping society because we should regulate each other?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought up this example about Charlie Kirk, okay? Because I do think that there's a big difference between, as you said, just, society regulating itself and, even influencers doing exposure campaigns on people, for literally celebrating a political assassination, right? Which is an illegal, like the political assassination obviously is illegal.
Right.
And then to celebrate political violence, I would think would be in a different social category as far as like what we would as a society, kind of want to um, make into a pariah versus, somebody saying, well, I have an opinion about election interference, or I have an opinion about man becoming a woman, or I, have an opinion about COVID vaccines. I think that those three things, the latter things, are in the category where reasonable minds can disagree.
Mm.
Um, I I also think reason, and again, I'll just full disclosure, I was at a Turning Point USA event this past summer. I happen to like Charlie Kirk. I think a lot of the talk about him as a racist is not true, right?
Mhm.
So just to be open about where I stand on that particular question. However, I don't believe Charlie Kirk either would ever want to try to stop people from saying that they believe he's a racist or whatever, because then great, he would say, let's pull out the videos, let's talk about it. But to me, it crosses the Rubicon when you start literally celebrating political violence and you start saying, wow, what I think people found sickening was watching people doing dances saying Charlie Kirk is dead, he got shot, he's dead, literally not just disagreeing with him on his opinions, but outright celebrating not only political violence but deadly political violence.
Mhm.
That to me is in a different category.
I agree, but we see it all the time. I think that a lot of people were really triggered about it being done toward Charlie Kirk. But, when Paul Pelosi, for example, was attacked with a hammer, this is an elderly man attacked with a hammer. I get he didn't die, but he could have. And a lot of people on the right made fun of that. A lot of people on the right mocked him. And that uh, so I mean, it's happening on both sides. And then also on a daily basis, people celebrate the death of like children in Gaza, for example. On a daily basis, they celebrate whether it be that side of the war or the other side of the war. You've got on both sides, you've got people celebrating the killing of IDF soldiers, and you've got people celebrating the death of people of Palestinians in Gaza. Right on both sides of that conflict. Say the same thing with Russians and Ukrainians. You see people celebrating the death of Russian soldiers. You see people celebrating the death of Ukrainian soldiers, right? I mean, and as a society, we don't regulate that. We don't have that same visceral reaction to the people who celebrate this. We just think we're on two sides of the war, to have different opinions on the war. I mean, that is more or less what how we handle wars and death that happens in wars. Or do you see what I'm saying? Like,
I
yeah,
do, but I have a counterpoint,
okay,
and I'm genuinely curious what you think about this. And by the way, I just want to say I totally agree with you. Anybody like celebrating an attack on Paul Pelosi, I would agree with you is that's really twisted. Um, I I I I just wanna say I totally agree with you there. And then you also brought up Gaza and, Ukraine, Russia. And I don't really think that those are are fair comparisons because what Paul Pelosi and Charlie Kirk have in common that's different is that that's cases where a random citizen in what they in their mind is kind of a vigilante violence, and again with Paul Pelosi, it was such a weird situation
sure,
as far as all the details of what is happening there. But when you have Ukraine, Russia, and you have, Gaza, Israel, these are at least situations where I think there's like an actual war, that's been declared, and there's, rules of war. I'm not an expert on geopolitics, but I
mhm,
think that violence that happens in the context of a war obviously is terrible. And again, I think it's completely sick if people are celebrating, and I shouldn't say if, I should say that
mhm,
people are celebrating, the death of children anywhere. But I do think that it's a different category when you talk about the carnage of war
yeah,
versus, a vigilante justice in his mind going to just take out a person that was simply
right,
sitting there having a debate.
right, right. But see, this is where it gets tricky, right? And these are good examples for us to bring up because this is where it gets tricky when it comes to what should society regulate when it comes to cancel culture and free speech. We already know the government, right? I mean, your book, it's not really, is it focused on like government censorship and what the government's doing to us, or is it more about the cancel culture amongst ourselves, the free speech
It's
amongst ourselves?
it's more about free speech amongst ourselves, but it does touch on the very sinister fact of what can happen when the government does get involved is now even YouTube acknowledged, right? That it was like
Yeah.
shutting down accounts because they simply said things, about COVID that like later turned out to be true.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you're right. I think that there's a whole other category that is important that my book actually focuses on a lot, which is just regular everyday people that feel kind of pressured to stay silent because they don't want to, make waves. They don't want to be quote canceled, even if
Right.
they don't have any legal concerns. They just don't want to be uninvited to the barbecue.
Right.
And part of what I'm trying to help people understand is that it really is worth it to speak up because people can feel, and interestingly enough, especially women can feel, that like, oh well, I don't really want to make waves, like I just won't, seek confrontation. And what I want people to know is that there's actually a mental health cost to that. I was somewhat guilty of this myself before I really thought about the issue. As I thought, well, what does it matter if you just keep your views to yourself? And I'm not either, by the way, saying that people shouldn't have a filter. Like I have a whole chapter on healthy self-restraint. Like there's nothing wrong with, being judicious about when and where and how you express yourself. But if you're coming to the point where people in your life that are supposed to like know you don't really know what you really think about certain topics, and then they go around saying things right in front of your face that trash people with your point of view, in part because they don't even know that you have that point of view.
Mhm.
What's happening is that it's degrading the quality of your social support. So one of the things that is really important in mental health is social support, good relationships. And when we don't feel safe to express ourselves because we feel our relationships are so fragile that people would cancel us, it's a very anxiety provoking way to live your life, and it deprives you of true, genuine, solid social support, for one thing. I mean, also language, naming our feelings and our emotions. It's one of the ways that we do what's called emotional regulation. And so when we're just holding all of that inside, we can really start to get in suppression, repression, denial. I imagine like these are kind of commonplace everyday psychology terms that people are aware of, but I don't think that they're necessarily putting them into like the cancel culture conversation of we don't want to be sort of canceling ourselves, so to speak, by holding back, which I actually see a lot.
Mhm.
And we don't want other people to be holding back around us. Like I've also come to realize that if I don't go out of my way to make it clear to people in my life that even if they disagree with me about stuff, that I still want them in my life, that they could be holding back around me. And I don't want that either. I want everyone to be able to be themselves.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.